President, less than a month ago, President Biden made a surprising statement, or maybe I should say another surprising statement. He said, my Build Back Better agenda cost $0. $0. That's a big, you might even say, unbelievable claim. For starters, half of his agenda is a $1 trillion infrastructure bill that will increase the deficit by more than $250 billion over 10 years. The other part is a multi-trillion-dollar tax and spending spree, which leans on damaging tax hikes to cover a long list of social welfare programs to make the United States of America look more like, say, a European social welfare state. Now, how could that possibly cost $0? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It can't. Even the Washington Post fact checkers gave this claim 2 Pinocchios. This strategy of misleading, misstating, and I hate to say it, but there's no other word for it, downright lying to the American people is a tried and true strategy of the Biden administration. Whether it's advancing legislation or dodging a crisis, there's no promise that's too big to make, even if it's patently false. Another example. Dating back to the campaign trail, President Biden has repeatedly promised the American people, if you make over $400,000 a year, if you make under $400,000 a year, you will not pay more income tax. Well, we've heard the same talking points from the Treasury Secretary, Secretary Yellen, and the White House press secretary dutifully comes out and parrots the same position again and again and again. It's almost as if you say something often enough, people will begin to believe it, even if it's not true. Considering the enormous amounts of spending that the Biden administration has promised, I understand why they're a little worried about the truth. All of us like free stuff, whether it's a free T-shirt at a football game or free samples at a grocery store. What folks don't like, though, is learning that they're being played, that they're still paying, but maybe by a different means. So when it comes to free college, free child care, and other free programs under President Biden's agenda, most people realize there's no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody, somewhere, is going to have to pay for it. Even if it's borrowed money. The next generation, like our pages here, when they enter the workforce, they're going to be the ones that have to pay that money back. Somebody's going to have to pay it back. So there's no such thing as free. Contrary to the promises made by President Biden and his administration, the middle class will help to foot the bill for this spending bonanza. An analysis by the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation found that many families will see their taxes increase under President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. In 2023, 2 years from now, 18% of those earning between $75,000 and $100,000 will pay more in taxes, not $400,000 or more. More than a third of the folks earning between $100,000 and $200,000 a year will see a tax increase, not people making $400,000 or more. If this trend continues into 2027, well over half of taxpayers earning between $75,000 and $100,000 will pay more in taxes. And a whopping 86% of folks earning between $100,000 and $200,000 will see a tax increase. Now, you might wonder, how can the president have it so wrong? This is not news to President Biden. He knows better. He's surrounded by world-class economic advisors, analysts, and tax experts who scrutinize and scrub every single policy before it comes to see the light of day. Yet you might wonder, why does the president persist in claiming that his tax hikes won't impact the middle class, even as he's trying to slip them a massive tax bill? I hate to state the obvious, but it's just dishonest. Of course, all this comes at a time when many family budgets are already underwater, struggling to recover from the fiscal impact of COVID-19. Now, from gas stations to grocery stores to electricity bills and restaurant checks, the American people are being pummeled by inflation, paying more for the things that they used to pay less for. What's the Biden administration response? Well, the president's chief of staff, Ron Klain, dismissed inflation as something he called a high-class problem, which I guess means that only rich people are suffering or experience that inflation. Again, this is clearly not true. My constituents in Texas don't see it that way. They see inflation outpacing their wage increases and essentially giving them a pay cut. They're paying 10% more at the butcher counter than they were a year ago, 42% more on gasoline. If you're a senior operating on a fixed income, you have to spend more of that fixed income to end up with less. So no, this isn't just a problem for the high class. Unfortunately, it's not going away soon either. You remember when concerns were raised with the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jay Powell, about inflation. He said, well, it's probably only transitory, meaning it's a passing moment. Well, now we see that economists expect inflation rates to remain steady through the end of next year, which would mark the longest period of inflation above 5% in 3 decades. So if inflation is at 5%, that means you're having to pay $1.05 to get what you used to pay $1 for, and it's compounded each year. While inflation is expected to ease some, or at least we're hoping and praying that's the effect, by the middle of next year, rates are still likely to be higher than they were before the pandemic. Folks who can't afford to fill up their gas tanks to get back and forth to work or buy what they need at the grocery store don't need to be told that things are just fine when they know they're not. The American people need to see real leadership here that addresses the root causes of inflation, not pouring gas on that inflation as the $3.5 trillion reckless tax and spending spree would do. It would just create more money chasing the same goods and services, driving prices up. And the American people certainly deserve better than false statements that ignore the magnitude of their pain. But as I said before, we've seen this playbook again and again. Following an objectively chaotic exit from Afghanistan because of the president's arbitrary decision date, President Biden called the mission an extraordinary success. Well, we know that's not true. We can see that with our own eyes. We know that 13 brave service members lost their lives in a terrorist attack, including a young Marine named David Espinoza, whose funeral my wife and I attended in Laredo, Texas. Countless Americans and Afghan allies were left behind. We heard from the State Department today, they can't even tell us how many Afghans who qualify for the special immigrant visa remain in Afghanistan. And we know now with the Taliban in control that they are hunting down people who worked with the United States during the last 20 years in order to prevent another terrorist attack like we experienced on 9/11/2001. And no, the new Taliban is not better or a kinder, gentler version of the old Taliban. So in no way could this be considered a success, let alone an extraordinary one. And then there's the border. Ever since President Biden became president, his administration has either ignored, downplayed, or denied the humanitarian crisis at our border. For months, the administration wouldn't even talk about it. And when it did, there were very peculiar rules that applied, apparently, to how it should be discussed. The administration refused to use the term crisis and came up with a range of euphemisms to downplay what was actually happening. They called it a challenge, a situation, a mess, all to apparently deceive the American people into thinking that what you're seeing with your own eyes is not really a problem. The Secretary of Homeland Security took this deception to a whole new level recently. When testifying before a House committee last week, Secretary Mayorkas said the border is, quote, no less secure than it was previously, close quote. That, Madam President, is demonstrably false. The data tell a very clearly different story. In the first 7 months of the Biden administration, more than 1.2 million migrants have crossed our southern border. That's an astronomical number, 1.2 million. To provide some context, in 7 months, Customs and Border Protection encountered 2.5 times as many people as they did in all of fiscal year 2020. So it's not getting any better. Yet the Secretary of Homeland Security, whose responsibility it is to secure the border, says things are no worse off than they used to be. At the same time, he tells us that the numbers are unrivaled in the last 20 years. Both can't be true. So whatever you want to call this, lying, misleading, or gaslighting, we've all had to learn a little bit of a new vocabulary. Gaslighting basically means creating your own alternative reality and trying to sell that as true. Well, none of this changes the fact that the Biden administration has consistently tried to deceive the American people about each of these matters, and the list actually goes on and on. The president and his administration won't even admit there's a humanitarian crisis along our southern border, let alone take the pretty obvious and necessary steps to address it. Senator Sinema from Arizona, a Democrat, and I, a Republican from Texas, working with Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Laredo, and Tony Gonzalez, a Republican who represents the largest border district in the country. We presented the bipartisan border security plan, but the administration just looks the other way. They won't acknowledge their massive failures in Afghanistan either, which resulted in the death of 13 service members and left our allies, our friends, and their families in a lurch. And they refuse to admit that their reckless tax and spending spree bill is designed to fundamentally transform America and will drive up taxes, not just for the wealthy, but for the middle class, and hurt our already wobbly post-pandemic economy. This is not what leadership should look like. The American people deserve better than getting scammed by their own president, no less. If the administration put half as much energy into trying to solve problems as it does in trying to dissemble about them or to cover them up, our nation would be far better off. Madam President, I yield the floor.